Hey guys, I'm back from a short Diablo 4 break. So 1 month ago the game seemed very dead, so I and many other content creators just stopped doing videos. But now with season 2 we have a lot of new content and stuff to discuss. So yeah, I want to first take a look at the new patch notes. Yesterday was a big developer stream and they showed many changes. So I want to discuss some things here. I will not go over everything. I will mostly focus on the rogue class as always. And I want to start with the balance updates, which are mostly there's also many stuff. For example, resistances and armor get changed. So all of the old defensive mechanics change up a bit in the next season. So I will also do a video about that. But for now, I want to focus on the damage bucket updates. So if you didn't watch this stream, then this may something new for you. So before season 2, vulnerable damage and critical strike damage were the two most powerful damage affixes in the game. And I have some videos where I explained how damage calculation works. So you have this different damage buckets in the game. So for example, you have one bucket, this is only vulnerable, you have one bucket, this is only crit, and you have like a big bucket where you have all of the other additive damage types, like all damage, cold damage, fire damage, poison damage. Then you also have your main stats. So for rogue, it's dexterity, for example. And then all of these buckets get multiplied by each other. And this is your total, your true DPS, kind of. So, of course, you have other factors like some legendary aspects or your Paragon board, your skills, and so on. But this is kind of the core of Diablo 4 damage calculation. And now they have changed how vulnerable damage and critical strike damage work. So there will be like these big buckets here, they won't exist. But what they did, they made of this, like you could stack these buckets endlessly. So with each affix on your item, which says plus 10% vulnerable damage, for example, you would grow this bucket. So if you have 200% vulnerable damage, then your bucket is as big. And now they made these buckets much smaller. So you have vulnerable damage and critical strike damage become much less important for your damage bucket calculation. So for example, vulnerable damage now only is capped at a maximum of 20%, and critical strike damage is capped at 50%. So what this means is how, like, it doesn't matter how much, how many stats you put in vulnerable damage. So if you would have 200% vulnerable damage on your character sheet, only 20% will go, like, will be this multiplicative damage bucket. And all the other, I think, I mean, it used to be that you have 20% from the beginning of the game. I don't know if it works now that you will subtract 20 from 200 and then you have 180 left, or if you have always 20% and you just need to make your enemy vulnerable. I think this is most likely the case. So this means if you have 200% invulnerable damage, this will no longer go into this bucket, but instead this will go in your additive damage bucket. So you have no possibility to scale your vulnerable damage bucket and your critical strike damage bucket. So for critical strike damage, it's the same. So also this damage goes here into this additive damage bucket. So what this means for the game is that now you have this very small 2 buckets for vulnerable and critical, like I just mentioned. And then you have a big, very, very big bucket with all additive damage. And here, like I mentioned before, kind of everything goes into this bucket. So you have all damage, you have for rogue, you have cutthroat damage, you have core skill damage, and now you have also vulnerable and crit. So basically everything just goes into this huge bucket. I think you will reach over 1000% now in the end game. So with level 100 you should have more than 1000% additive damage, I believe, so far. So this shifts the game in terms of damage calculation and also the actual damage numbers in a very dramatic way. But the developers already said, don't worry, we have thought about this, and somewhere they mentioned that the monsters in the game, so all the enemies you will encounter, will also scale down. So all of the strong builds that used to be very strong before will still feel very strong and powerful because the monsters just have less health, for example. So even though the damage numbers will go down, it doesn't mean that you will feel much weaker than before. That's what the devs at least said for now, and we need to test if this is true or not. And so what this means for your itemization and building, like endgame builds, is one thing. I need to draw the last damage bucket here, which is dexterity. So it seems like dexterity, so your main attribute for rogue, it's dexterity, will be now one of the most strong and most powerful damage buckets. So I can highly recommend you to invest as much as main stats as you can in your Paragon board, in your item system, so on your item affixes, because dexterity is still its own damage bucket. So if you make this bucket bigger and bigger, this will increase your damage by a more significant amount than you would put it in like this big additive damage bucket here. So this is one insight, I think. So dexterity, primary attribute for all the classes, will be a very significant and important damage bucket. Then vulnerable and crit are these attributes or affixes kind of dead now? Well, I don't think so. I think it depends, but they will play a significantly less important role in this game, and that's what I think. That's something good, and that's something that the developers wanted to achieve. So they also mentioned here. Somewhere here, this change is not intended to lower the power of the best builds, but rather allow more builds to reach that same level of power. And I think that with this approach they have chosen here, this statement could be correct. So I also believe that now more builds that are not as reliant, not that reliant on applying vulnerability, for example, they will shine now in the meta. So before that, the question always was, how can I make my enemies consistent and like vulnerable in a consistent way? And if the answer was no, I can't make my enemies consistently vulnerable, then this build usually was not very powerful. And now, so vulnerability plays a less significant role, so you only get 20% damage bonus, multiplicative damage bonus for making enemies vulnerable. So many builds can just pass on this ability and say, well, I don't care, I have better ways to scale my damage. So I think this is a good thing. And what this basically means is that each class and each build will have its own unique way to maximize its damage, besides of the primary resource damage bucket, as I just mentioned. And they also gave us one example. I'm not sure where I can find it. I think it was something like, so maybe if I type multiplicative, if I won't find it, then, okay, actually it's here in the damage buckets updates. I think here they said we also have added a variety of mechanics to classes that encourage them to chase other stats for multiplicative bonuses. And I think somewhere else they gave us one concrete example. So I can also show you this. So one mechanic that they are mentioning here is through paragon nodes and also maybe glyphs, I'm not sure, but mostly nodes. So I can make a new here. So in the paragon board, you will have nodes, which will say something like, for each 10% of, so no, sorry, for, let's make it different, for each 30% additive fire damage, you will get, let's say, 5% multiplicative fire damage. So what this basically means is, so all of fire damage affixes, for example, on your items and paragon board, they are all additive. So like I mentioned before, they go into this huge additive damage bucket. So what this means, your character will stack some amount of fire damage, for example. So let's say you will have something like, let's say 180% fire damage total. And this is additive because, yeah, everything is additive in items and paragon. And now with this legendary node, you will get 5% per each 30% of your fire damage. So 180 divided by 30 is 6. So you will get 6 times 5, so 30% multiplicative fire damage. So this damage factor will increase your total DPS by 30%. And I think this will be common for all classes. So each class will have different ways and different legendary nodes or paragon nodes, which will encourage them to stack one unique damage type, like fire damage in this case. And with stacking this damage, they will further enhance and scale their total damage by a significant amount. So I think this is the direction that the developers have chosen for the game and how to scale damage and in the end game. So we just need to wait to see all of the new changes in the Paragon system, and then we can evaluate how many new builds will thrive and what are your new possibilities for designing new builds and new class archetypes. So yeah, quite interesting. I think it's kind of refreshing. So it really feels like Diablo 4 is now a different game a bit. So I'm not sure if they can like fulfill all of the promises they made so far, but I'm quite optimistic, I can say that. I'm optimistic that the developers have chosen the right direction and that the game will get better in the next season, and that I will probably will try to play a bit of the season and make some content. So yeah, I think for the first video this is just enough. So we have discussed damage bucket updates, and also to mention, they mentioned here that because critical strike damage and vulnerable damage are less powerful now, they kind of revert all of the nerfs they did in the past to them. So vulnerable damage and critical strike damage, all of these affixes and items get a significantly increase, so 100% at max. So yeah, they will balance it a little bit that way. So we just need to wait until we see all the new stuff, all the new affixes, the new values for item affixes and Paragon board system and nodes. And so yeah, let's wait for that. And I will do some videos about the new defensive mechanics in the game, so resistances and armor. So I think this will probably be my next video. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned and have a nice day. Until there, bye bye.